As some of you may know, or may not know, outside of YouTube, I've been a musician for most of my life, and heavy genres like metal helped shape a lot of how I view music as a whole. Some of the first things I learned on guitar were iconic metal riffs from the 70s and 80s, and that DNA is in nearly everything I write. Music and video games have always been like the two biggest things in my life, and I was sitting here wondering why I never made a video marrying the two. So, knowing there were a few of them floating around back in the day, I decided to check out as many games as I could that were based on or heavily inspired by metal bands. 10,000 years later, here it is. This video took so long to come out that my hair color doesn't even match the thumbnail. In fact, I've literally shaved my head since then, so that's a testament to how long it took for this to be finished. Unfortunately, even worse, and it ties into the subject matter here, I started this video back before Ozzy passed away. And that happened, and I was like, damn, I really need to get this out. Nearly 4 months later, and not only did Ozzy pass, but we also just recently lost Ace Frehley. Insane. Rest in peace to both of those legends. I know this is just a silly YouTube video, but this one goes out to them. So, let's take a look at some games throughout the years that have been based on or inspired by iconic metal bands and artists. Okay, so as I said, I'm going to be talking about games that are based on metal or at least metal-adjacent bands. Genres in music, that whole argument is very, very annoying, so I guarantee I'm going to have people in the comments telling me this and that isn't metal, so before I even begin, take my stipulation on genre with a grain of salt. It's going to be loose at best. Entire videos can and surely have been made arguing musical genres, so argue in their comment sections instead, I beg of you. Anyway, before getting into the video proper, I want to have a little honorable mention section to talk about a few games that either never came out, aren't playable anymore, or just don't exactly fit the criteria of the video but are still, like, relevant. First up would be a game, or what would have been a game, called Damage Inc., a PS2 game based on Metallica that looks to have supposed to have played something like Twisted Metal or Grand Theft Auto. There was a teaser trailer released for it and everything, but the game never saw the light of day. As far as I know, there's never been an officially released reason for the game being killed, but all that's known is that it had something to do with the publisher. There were a couple attempts to revive the project for other platforms, but that obviously never came to fruition. There is, however, a one-stage build floating around, so at least there's some evidence of this even existing in the first place. Now, as for the game that can't be played anymore, Iron Maiden had a mobile game years ago called Legacy of the Beast. To be fair, mobile games aren't usually something I cover anyway, but given the nature of this video, it would have fit. It was a free-to-play, turn-based RPG. You play as Iron Maiden's mascot, Eddie, in an effort to retrieve his soul, which was shattered and spread across different worlds. As I said, it's a mobile, turn-based RPG, and I mean, if you're no stranger to that kind of thing, then what you see here is kind of what you get. Apparently, the game was pretty good, and to my eye, it didn't look too bad either. Unfortunately, about a year ago, the game was shut down and removed from storefronts. The website still exists, and you can look around, but the game itself is dead. Now, as for the game that doesn't really fit the criteria of the video, I mean, it's hard to ignore Brutal Legend, a metal-themed hack-and-slash starring Jack Black. Despite this game being very much intentionally metal, it's more so based on metal as a concept and theme, and not based on any specific band or bands. The idea for making this video was going to be to talk about games based on actual bands specifically, but I feel like I'd be remiss not to at least mention Brutal Legend. Plus, if I didn't, I'd get 5,000 comments telling me I forgot Brutal Legend anyway. So, if nothing more, this is a formality just to tell you, no, I did not forget Brutal Legend. Now that that's all out of the way, let's go in chronological order and check out some games based on metal bands. With an asterisk. I'll be honest, this first game is one of the main reasons I wanted to do a video like this. I've actually always wanted to cover it for years, but I never really found an appropriate reason to. It's a Famicom exclusive, so initially it only ever came out in Japan. I always said one day I would play it, but I never really got around to it. From the very little information I knew about it, it seemed like this secret hidden gem Castlevania clone by Irem back in 1989, weirdly based, at least story-wise, on a bunch of heavy metal references. Case in point, the game is called Holy Diver, taken directly from Ronnie James Dio's debut solo album of the same name. Eventually, in 2018, the game did actually get an NES release by Retrobit, which I did buy, but promptly put on the shelf and never played. So normally the story of an NES game isn't always necessarily something that needs to be gone over, but this is where all these metal references I mentioned happen to be. So let's quickly go over the story as it's laid out in the manual. The Demon King of the Underground Dark Empire has extended darkness into the world. King Crimson, there's the first musical reference, whose wisdom has guided the world of magic for generations, is weakened and sent his two sons, Randy and Zack, into hiding. Second and third reference,
with the trust of their faithful servant Ozzy. Fourth reference, the three devote themselves to the cause of holy magic justice, becoming wizard kings. 17 years later, following Ozzy's unfortunate passing. Weird timing on that one. And Zack's mysterious disappearance, Randy must embark on his solo journey to bring light back to the world. Black Slayer, fifth reference, has increased his empire over the countryside, making his interdimensional forces even stronger. To defeat Black Slayer and his army, Randy must retrieve the 5 Crimson Emblem Seals. I don't know what that accent for that dramatic reading was. I was bouncing back and forth between a couple, but what, it doesn't matter. Okay, so a couple things here. First off, I reread this like 400 times and it still doesn't make sense to me. Second, this is also the Retrobit translation from the re-release. The mention of Slayer, as far as I know, is mentioned prior to the one time this version of the manual brings it up, which would honestly make more sense since it just kind of threw that in out of nowhere. And second, this version of the story doesn't bring this up, but apparently King Crimson's name is supposedly Ronnie. Kind of an important detail considering the name of the game, but this was for whatever reason omitted from the re-release. Not that the story really makes any sense anyway, but I feel like the musical references are kind of a weird thing to leave out, since that was one of the things that drove attention to this game to even warrant a re-release in the first place. Anyway, that's pretty much where the connections to classic metal end. When stripped of all that, it's just your typical NES platformer that's just way too fucking difficult for its own good. At first glance, it might appear to be a Castlevania clone, but it honestly, it isn't really. Sure, on the surface, aesthetically, it looks a bit similar, especially when looking at the main character's sprite, but those surface-level details are kind of where that ends. It's definitely a similar type of game, but the physics are vastly different, and aside from a couple similar enemy types early on, overall, the game doesn't really have a Castlevania feel to it. One surprising thing, given the theme here, is that the music is just kind of okay. It isn't bad by any means, it's catchy enough, but when you have so many NES games with melodies that rival what some metal bands were doing at the time, this game definitely comes up short. It's fine, it serves its purpose, but I won't be humming the game's OST after I'm done with it. Actually, if I'm being honest, I'm gonna do whatever I can to not think about this game at all, because holy fucking shit was this a nightmare to play. Look, I grew up in the NES era, very, very late stage NES era, but the console was still relevant enough. I'm at the very least decent at these games. I can beat Mega Man, I can beat Castlevania, I can beat Ninja Gaiden. When the term NES hard gets brought up, I think there's two versions of this phrase. Super difficult to increase playtime, but ultimately doable, like the games I just mentioned, and then whatever this bullshit is. Games that are so incredibly difficult that I honestly can't even get through this shit with save states. I really tried to get through this game so I at the very least could have some footage of the later stages, even if that meant save stating, but even that wasn't enough. Sure, there's always the option to use cheats, but even I have my limits. This game is unreasonably difficult to the point of being pretty unplayable in my opinion. Some of the most unforgiving enemy placement I've ever seen, horrible knockback, limited lives and resources. Sure, there's unlimited continues, but each screen is so unrelenting that it really doesn't help much, and getting sent back to the beginning of a stage feels almost as bad as a full-on game over. There are power-ups and spells you obtain or find in each of the stages, and these power-ups do help, but even with every trick up my sleeve, I could not make it past about like halfway through this game, and that's with save states. Look, I'm glad the game exists. It's super weird and the kind of thing that could only happen back during the Wild West days of gaming. It's definitely a weird relic of the past, and yeah, it's worth taking a look at, but that's about it. A look. Also, a side note, but Dio, notoriously detested Ozzy, so admittedly the story is just strange overall. I'd say there was no rhyme or reason to it, but they paired Ozzy with Randy Rhoads and Zakk Wylde, so there's a little consistency there. I don't know, man. At first glance, Crue Ball seems to not make a whole lot of sense. Why would there be a Sega Genesis pinball game based on a glam metal band? Sounds a little weird, but considering there have been lots of real-world pinball tables based on bands, it's really not all that crazy. What is nonsensical and crazy, though, is the fact that this game was never supposed to be a licensed game at all. It was originally a standard pinball game going to be released under the name Twisted Flipper, which to me sounds too close to Twisted Sister to be a coincidence, but the point is it had no genuine ties to anything other than itself. The producer of the game originally wanted to do a tie-in with the MTV show Headbangers Ball, but with MTV declining, Motley Crue were kind of thrown in last minute. Truth be told, this has almost nothing to do with Motley Crue at all. In the intro cutscene, some guy pulls up to this house late at night, blasting Motley Crue music until his neighbors yell at him to turn it off, and there's some little vague Motley Crue-themed things thrown in here or there, but it's basically nothing. It's almost nothing. You could have named this game anything else, and I promise you, nobody would have known the difference, even down to the music.
Sure, the game does feature 3 Motley Crue songs, surprisingly good Genesis chiptune renditions of Dr. Feelgood, Livewire, and Home Sweet Home, but outside of that, the mass majority of this game's soundtrack consists of original songs written by the game's composer, Brian Schmidt. Granted, these tracks are still pretty metal and well-written, but that's what you'll be listening to for the bulk of your playthrough here. I'll be honest, outside of the intro and the sound test, I never actually heard any of the Crue songs during gameplay, and considering there's nothing identifiably Crue in these stages, it's easy to forget this was supposed to be a Motley Crue game. From what I played, it was fine enough. Physics weren't bad, music was good, but I'll be honest, pinball loses me pretty quick, especially since I'm pretty bad at it. I wasn't even good enough at it to really progress, and from what I had heard, there are actually 9 stages, so surely the game would keep my attention a little better if I had got to see the other stages. As long as each new table brings some fresh flair and some new assets, that's kind of all I need to keep me going. So, for the sake of being thorough, even though I'm terrible at pinball and couldn't progress on my own, I thought to myself, hey, this is a game from 1992, it probably has a level select code. And sure enough, I was right. So I entered the code and enabled level select so I could see the other stages, and well, besides a few palette swaps here and there and some altered hazards, this is all the same shit over and over and over. And I made sure to check every stage. I'll be honest, I'm kind of glad I didn't break my ass trying to progress on my own after seeing this. Apparently, all you need to do in each stage is take out all the enemies and destructible objects, which unlocks the top of the screen where the boss lies. I did get to the first boss, but unfortunately, if you lose your ball one time, you need to start over again, which kind of made me want to rip my hair out. Apparently, there's also these bonus stages where you play Pong, I guess, but I never saw them myself. Look, this game is fine, but it really has nothing to do with Motley Crue, really, and the songs that are included are so minimal that not including them at all would have changed basically nothing. As for the game itself, like as a game, it's fine. It's just fine. The physics are good enough, and the music is actually pretty good, but there just isn't any variety here to hold your attention for very long. One of the alluring features of pinball in the first place is all the flashy lights and sounds. It's a barrage of dopamine hitting you in the face in rapid succession. This, though, is just kind of bland. It isn't bad, it plays fine, I guess, but it's probably not going to hold your attention for more than a lunch break's worth of playtime. However, the fact that they released a game based on Motley Crue of all bands in 1992 is something only that era of gaming could produce, and it's something that any fan of the band should check out at least once. You'll have fun for like 10 minutes and then be over it. Honestly though, if nothing more, this game's existence is more than worth it for the 16-bit renditions of Livewire and Dr. Feelgood. Alright, now we're gonna briefly move it over to the PC to check out a game that I was losing my mind trying to get to run, and in the end, could barely even get it to run at all. Now, I'm gonna be sourcing some footage here for this one, because when I tell you I could barely run it, I really mean it. I tried recording my own footage, but the game was displaying in such a graphically glitched up state that the footage is essentially unusable. I almost gave up entirely, but I wanted to try to at least get an idea for how this game plays, but I digress. In 1999, Iron Maiden released what is pretty much a budget-quality on-rails/gallery shooter called Ed Hunter, based on the band's mascot and history. It's more or less a dumbed-down version of something like House of the Dead, the House of the Ed, if you will.
Oh, brother, this guy stinks!
It's about a 2-hour-long slog of a game where you just relentlessly shoot hordes of enemies. Now sure, this is basically what something like House of the Dead or Time Crisis is, but these stages drag on entirely too long, and there's barely any variety here. Now each of these stages are based on various Iron Maiden album cover arts, using the art as inspiration to flesh out an entire level based on each one, but unfortunately, that's really not enough to keep you engaged for more than like 10 minutes, which is bad news for a game that's about 2 hours long. And each stage, I swear, it takes like 10 to 15 minutes, so by the 5-minute mark, you're burnt out on whatever stage you're currently on, and that's also not helped by the soundtrack. Sure, Maiden songs are the soundtrack, but they loop. I have absolutely no idea why the game wouldn't just cycle between songs once they end, but unfortunately, for whatever reason, only one song plays per stage, meaning you need to listen to the same song on loop like 4 times per stage. I'll be honest, there really just isn't much here. What you're seeing is basically the entire game. I personally didn't play very far, but from the looks of it, I'm missing virtually nothing. It's 2 hours of pretty much the exact same thing with a different coat of paint every 15 minutes. And this also wasn't helped by the fact that for some reason I wasn't able to pause my game. Not sure if that was just an issue with how the game was running for me, but there was just no way I was sitting here not even being able to look away from my screen for 2 hours. Later on, there's apparently a couple boss fights somewhere, and the game does give you a few other weapons, but that's basically it. And apparently, the game's ending is also super anticlimactic, and then the game just kind of ends. Honestly, and I don't usually say this, but you can probably skip this one.
If you're a die-hard Maiden fan, be my guest, but it's just entirely too much of a pain in the ass to get some really old PC games to run, and even then, there just isn't really much here. It's way, way too repetitive, and you really aren't getting much more out of playing this game yourself than if you just watched a long play of it. Alright, this one is such a convoluted mess that I don't even know where to start with it. So, in 2000, an FPS based on Kiss was released for PC, and a few months later for the Sega Dreamcast, which is the version I'll be talking about here. Now, I know the PC version would have been the ideal way to experience this, but I'd rather boot up my Dreamcast than rack my brain trying to figure out how to run this on PC. It was made by a studio called Third Law Interactive, a studio I've never heard of before and who apparently wasn't around for very long. As it turns out, this was actually a group of people who had recently left Ion Storm, the post-id Software John Romero-headed studio that was responsible for Daikatana, which is kind of funny, because before even knowing this, within the first 30 seconds of playing this game, I was getting Daikatana vibes, and I had no idea why. So this game is kind of strange even down to its concept. See, it's a first-person shooter that's based on Kiss, except it's not really based on Kiss. As much as I do like the band, I've never been a comic book person, and I'm just now finding out that around the time of the release of the Kiss album Psycho Circus, a comic book series of the same name by Todd McFarlane was apparently a thing. I had no idea this existed. I'm not going to do extensive research into the storyline of the comic, but all this to say, the game is based on the comics. So it's a game based on a comic which is based on Kiss, but not as a band, but as a concept. See, there's no Gene, Paul, Ace, or Peter here. Instead, you play as the members of a Kiss tribute band, all who, throughout the game, get weapons and abilities based on the personas of each band member. Now, in the PC version, apparently you can choose whichever character you want to start out as, but to complete the game, you need to get through all of them, as each episode features a different playable character. This is also kind of stupid, though, because the difficulty scales linearly. The PC version apparently even tells you that, so even though you have the choice, playing the episodes out of order doesn't really make any sense because the difficulty curve will be non-existent and bouncing all over the place. Luckily, the Dreamcast version makes your decision for you. Now, my first gripe, and honestly the biggest glaring issue with this game, at least on Dreamcast, is that, true to its name, a fucking psycho must have chosen these button mappings. Sure, you can remap a little, but not where it matters. Now, on PC this isn't an issue, but at the time, twin-stick FPS controls didn't exist, so developers had to compromise by coming up with controls that, though not as precise as a mouse and keyboard, gave more control than your standard left stick and right-hand button configurations really allowed for. In this case, you aim entirely with the left stick, and the A, B, X, and Y buttons act as a D-pad. If you're having a problem visualizing what this is like, pretend you're using a mouse and keyboard controls, but with the mouse in your left hand and WASD in the right. Right off the bat, I wasn't even sure I could competently play this game well enough to even get through any of it, so unfortunately I had to cave and play on easy mode, because I was fighting the controls way more than the game. In any case, though, the game itself is not the worst thing I've ever played. I've seen a lot of people talk about how bad it is, but if I'm honest, the more practice I got with the controls, the more I started to kind of enjoy the game a little. I love old FPS like Quake, and this, at least aesthetically and in terms of level design, fits right in with the FPSs of the time. For whatever reason, though, this game is just dark as hell. You can barely see anything sometimes, and apparently that's exclusive to the Dreamcast port. And it's a shame, because visually and artistically, this game is actually pretty solid and reminds me a lot of something like Quake or even the original Unreal. Each new area sees you searching out these different power-ups that come in the form of armor pieces or weapons, increasing your health, ammo, jump height, etc. You collect one of them per area, and once you've assembled everything, you progress to the next episode and start from square one with another Dollar Tree Kiss member with no power-ups. Like I said, the level design is actually pretty solid, and my only problem with it is that sometimes it's easy to get a little lost, but most of this could have been mitigated with better lighting, so I assume this is mostly a Dreamcast thing. The layout itself can get a little confusing, but it's nothing too bad, I think. Even most of the enemy designs are solid and interesting and seem to be taken right out of the id Software playbook. This game's main issue, and the one most people seem to complain about, are these machines that infinitely spawn these little enemies, of which there's a few different types. On their own, they don't pose too much of a threat, but when you're swarmed by hordes of them, it starts to get overwhelming, and it only stops once you've destroyed the machines. An enemy spawner isn't anything egregious in a vacuum, but it's the fact that the game overuses them, ultimately to its detriment. It seems like too often, the game tries to substitute interesting scenarios to create difficulty for generic enemy hordes, and that's this game's biggest problem. It spams these things all the time, and while it doesn't break the game, because luckily the game has infinite continues and it's pretty generous with its respawn points and autosave, it does get really annoying and cheapens the experience. This game could have been way better than it actually is, but I won't go as far as to say it sucks like many others have, especially if there's a superior PC port. I'd say if you're a Kiss fan or a 90s/2000s boomer shooter fan and have never heard of this weird Daikatana team game, it's worth checking out. You may not love it, you probably won't, but I got some enjoyment out of it, so maybe you can too. Well, here's another stupid pinball game, and this one's surprisingly worse. Kiss Pinball was originally released for Windows and then later ported to the PS1, and boy, does it scream Millennium-era budget PC game. I'd go as far as to say something you get out of the front of a fucking cereal box. Now, thematically, at least visually, this virtual pinball game has a lot more to do with Kiss than Crue Ball ever had to do with Motley Crue, but unlike Crue Ball, which despite having no visual elements that had anything to do with Motley Crue, this time, there's literally no Kiss music at all. And I'm honestly not sure which is worse. All that's here are these generic rock and metal guitar-driven loops. On one hand, you're making a game based on a band, you know, a musical artist. So having no music by said band seems insane. But honestly, in the case of Kiss, due to how integral the visual elements are to Kiss as a band, I guess if I had to pick one or the other, the visuals are probably more important. But like, I don't know why I'm needing to think about this. There shouldn't be a choice to be made here. Why the fuck is there no Kiss music in a game based on Kiss that's as bare bones as a virtual pinball game? At least in this one, there's two completely different tables to play on, not that that's really saying much. Also, the loading times are atrocious. Keep in mind, I'm playing this on a Mr. FPGA, so typically the load times are faster here than on official hardware, and yet the game still loads at a snail's pace. And what is it even loading anyway? All the visuals here are so low res and there's barely any animations or anything, so I'd love to know exactly why this game takes 10 billion years to load anything. The gameplay even slows down when there's more than one ball in play, which is extremely noticeable because the game is unnecessarily fast overall. Honestly, this just seems crazy to me because of how capable the PS1 actually is. Like, this really should not be taxing on the hardware at all. The only thing I can think of is maybe this is just a bad port. I haven't seen the original PC version, so I'd love to know how that runs. Anyway, the gameplay is way too fast, so the physics don't really make a whole lot of sense. The camera is also zoomed way too far in for how tall the table is, and the camera needs to constantly track the ball at all times. It's not like some other tables where the camera will pan up if the ball goes too high. It literally just tracks the ball's movement to a T, which is frankly kind of irritating to watch and, at least for me, a little nauseating. This gets even more stupid when there's two balls in play because the camera can't actually follow the balls anymore. So whenever more than one ball is in play on the table, there's a good chance you can only really track one ball at a time while the other one is out of frame. As I said before, and as you can obviously see, the visuals are nothing to write home about. They're low res and just do not look very good. At the very least, the second table with all the band members' heads on it looks marginally cooler, but overall, everything just kind of looks gaudy and messy. If you're wondering what media outlets at the time thought of this game, well, generally unfavorable seems to be the theme, with Jeff Gerstmann of GameSpot quoted as saying, "Kiss Pinball manages to mangle both the Kiss license and the concept of video pinball to the point of being almost totally unrecognizable. Kiss Pinball serves no useful purpose whatsoever. Kiss fans will be disappointed by the distinct lack of Kiss, and pinball fans will be disappointed by the distinct lack of pinball." Now, granted, this was a budget title coming in at only $9.99, but you have to keep in mind that this was 2001, and adjusting for inflation, that equates to almost $20, which is what I just paid for Silksong. So yeah, this wasn't worth $20. It was even the runner-up for GameSpot's Worst Game of 2001 award. Quite the accolade. I don't know, man, this sucks. There's no reason to play this. If you're a huge Kiss fan, then yeah, sure, it probably makes some sense to own it, but you're not going to want to play this for more than a couple minutes in your entire lifetime. I appreciate this having more to do with Kiss than Crue Ball did with Motley Crue, but having no Kiss songs in a Kiss game on top of an overall bad playing game is just dumb. This is a dumb game. And that's all of them. The ones I could find or play anyway. I'll be honest, I'm mostly less than impressed. The majority of these were not great, and the one game I did kind of have high hopes for, Holy Diver, ended up being so masochistic in its difficulty that it wasn't even fun. I do have to say, despite hearing bad things, Kiss Psycho Circus, The Nightmare Child, God, that's a mouthful, actually did surprise me, especially considering the version I played is supposed to be the bad one. I had a good time with that. It didn't leave some life-changing imprint on me, but it was enjoyable enough and looked good, and gave me a lot of Quake/90s id shooter vibes, which is admittedly a pretty easy way to win me over. As for the rest of them, take them or leave them. You're really not missing anything by not playing them. If you're a huge mega fan of said band, then sure, maybe check them out just to say you did. But other than that, there's no real experience you're missing out on. Except, like I said, that Kiss game. Honestly, if you don't like Kiss, I'd say you should at least check that out if you're a Boomer Shooter fan. Once again, it's not going to blow your mind, but I had a moderate amount of fun with what I played. Anyway, that's all I got for this one. See you guys next time, which hopefully won't be half a dozen months from now. Hey, thanks for watching the video. If you liked it and want to see more, there's a couple other videos you can check out right there. And if you want to see everything I upload, subscribe and tap the bell icon. And if you want to help support the channel, I also have a Patreon right there too.